Let's go ahead and get into the story about France. Now, a while back, I covered one of these protests that they had in France where their prime minister, Macron, had announced that he was going to increase the retirement age. Now, the way that mainstream media is discussing this, they are just mentioning that piece. They're not mentioning the other piece that they're protesting over, which is to get out of NATO, to end this war with Russia and Ukraine, and to call for some type of peace. So there's two things that are happening here. It's not just over the retirement age, and that's important because when you hear the way that mainstream media talks about this, you'll understand why I need to mention that piece. Let's go ahead and get into this first clip here. As you can see, it's on fire. People are not playing around in Paris. They are really lighting things on fire. They're doing other things as well. We're going to get into that. But this story is incredibly important, and I don't think it's receiving enough attention. So here we go.
Across the country tonight, French cities grinding to a halt. In the capital, thousands of people taking to the streets after French President Emmanuel Macron forced through an unpopular bill that raises the retirement age from 62 to 64 years old. And he did it without a vote. Protesters tonight throwing bottles at a police barricade and setting tires on fire. Police responding with tear gas and water cannons. Across every major city tonight, similar scenes. A woman in
Let's pause here for just a second. If you notice, she said he increased the retirement age without a vote. So the residents did not get the opportunity to vote on this at all. This is just something he did by basically executive order. So just keep that in mind.
Lyon saying the air was so thick with tear gas she couldn't breathe.
C'est dégueulasse quoi. On se dit à quoi ça sert d'avoir une assemblée nationale.
Thursday afternoon, France's Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne, an ally of Macron, triggering a constitutional tool that allowed the bill through with no floor vote.
On ne peut pas faire de paris sur l'avenir de nos.
There wasn't a floor vote either. So this is what people need to understand. So she's saying here we cannot gamble on the future of our pensions. So they have a couple of things that are going on here.
Cette réforme est nécessaire.
The uproar, immediate. Opposition members shutting down parliament, belting the French national anthem. Macron has long insisted the reforms are essential to ensure the pension system doesn't collapse. Mathematically speaking, the argument is the country will not be able to support future generations.
Is it because the pensions will collapse, or is it because he wants to keep people working longer? Because let's be real here, the retirement age in the US, they're trying to increase it here too, but everyone in the US doesn't receive a pension. They just want to increase it because they want us to work longer because they know labor is starting to suffer right now post-pandemic. So is it really because he feels that there aren't going to be enough pensions to give around, or that pension program is not going to last longer? Or is it because he wants to keep the French people working?
Pour le gouvernement qui continue, qui n'écoute pas le peuple.
In the last 3 months alone, there have been 8 consecutive national strikes. Millions of French workers, from teachers to police to refinery workers, have joined in. A recent poll by AFP finds a majority of the French support the protest movement against pension reform, and 59% support bringing the country to a standstill over it. The streets of Paris.
When we talk about a standstill, this is kind of what I was referring to when I discussed a general strike. They believe, 59% of them believe, if we need to stop production on everything, we're going to do it so that we can get what we want. If we want to stop working, all of us just go on strike, we're going to do it so that we can get what we want. Now, they don't want to use the words general strike because when you say that phrase, for some people, it can send out alarms, right? Of course, mainstream media doesn't want to say those words because they don't want to give the American people any ideas here. They don't want Americans here to start thinking, hey, maybe we could do something like that. And you're going to see that when I show you the clip from Case Study QB, because they talk about this in a negative way, not in a positive way. So you'll see here, the garbage is starting to pile up on the streets because the garbage workers are like, yeah, we're not working. So if you have trash piling up on the streets like this, this can be a serious issue. The city is going to start to smell. This is going to attract more rodents. Let's just be real. But trash is a serious issue. Remember that when you see, the trash workers, the sanitation department, when you see them driving down the street, just understand that the job that they are doing is very much essential.
Littered with trash, garbage collectors also striking, leaving more than 6,000 tons of waste on the streets, according to Paris City Hall.
If we encounter more garbage, though, we'll probably visit other parts of the city because we don't want to smell it.
France's civil aviation has asked airlines to reduce flights from Paris's Orly airport by 20% today. Travelers have been told to expect disruptions due to the strikes, but the unions and the protesters keeping the pressure on. We will continue, this man says. At the end of the day, our needs and our demands.
Now, Tom, as far as what happens next, politically speaking, the opposition now has 24 hours to put forward a vote of no confidence. That's incredibly rare in France, but if it passes, it brings down not only Macron's government, but also the president himself. Out on the street, though, protests will continue. And actually, the protest down at La Place de la Concorde apparently is going to start moving up the Champs-Élysées. Across the country, protests tonight have brought cities to a standstill. And the unions, Tom, have announced they will protest and strike again tomorrow.
Okay. So you see what's happening in France. This is what I was talking about. If we could have something like that happen here in the United States, where everyone just says, you know what? You guys aren't meeting our demands. We're not going to work anymore. So the garbage collectors will say, yeah, I'm not picking up trash anymore. It just is what it is until you meet our demands. This is why I say something like a general strike is actually much more effective than who you vote for president. Because once they're in there, you have no access to them anymore, and they're going to do what works for their donors. Now, Common Dreams reported on this, and it says Macron resign. French protests intensify over attempt to force retirement age hike. This forced passage with the use of Article 49.3 must be met with a response in line with this show of contempt towards the people. That's coming from one of the union leaders. It goes on to say, make this a little bit bigger. Protests in Paris and across France have ramped up since President Emmanuel Macron's government on Thursday used a controversial constitutional measure to force through a pension reform plan without a National Assembly vote. So again, essentially, here we would call that an executive order. Fears that the Senate approved measure, which would raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, did not have enough support to pass the lower house of parliament. And it led to a Council of Ministers meeting during which Macron reportedly said that my political interest would have been to submit a vote. But I consider that the financial and economic risk are too great at this stage. Now, that doesn't make any sense. If he says that his political interest would have been to submit a vote, then he should have submitted a vote. It goes on to say, after the meeting, French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne announced the decision to go with the nuclear option, invoking Article 49.3 of the French Constitution, a calculated risk considering the potential for a resulting motion of no confidence. Members of Parliament opposed to the overhaul filed a pair of no confidence motions on Friday, and votes are expected on Monday. Although unlikely, given the current makeup of the legislature, passing such a motion would not only reject the looming pension law, but also oust Macron's prime minister and cabinet, and likely lead to early elections in France. So if they were to push back on this, this could actually remove his prime minister, and his cabinet. Their laws are a little bit different than the laws that we have in the United States. Imagine if we could just do that same thing. Leaders of the Les Republicans are not sponsoring any such motions. Reuters explained that individuals in the Conservative Party have said they could break ranks, but the no confidence bill would require all of other opposition lawmakers and half of LR's 61 lawmakers to go through, which is a tall order. Still, Green MP Julian Bayou said it's maybe the first time that a motion of no confidence may overthrow the government. You hear this? May overthrow the government. Meanwhile, protests against the pension proposal, which have been happening throughout the year, continue in the streets, with some drawing comparison to France's Yellow Vest movement, sparked by fuel prices and economic conditions in 2018. Now, I want to say something here about the Yellow Vests. If we remember, when we're talking about the Twitter files, Matt Taibbi said that was one of the organizations that was suppressed on Twitter. The Yellow Vest. They really made things happen in France. So I have a lot of respect for them. He goes on to say here, not long after Bourne's Article 49.3 announcement on Thursday, protesters begin to converge on the sprawling Place de la Concorde in central Paris, a mere bridge away from the heavily guarded National Assembly. He goes on to say police used tear gas to disperse the Concorde crowd. Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin told RTL Radio 310 people were arrested nationwide, 258 of them in Paris. He said the opposition is legitimate, the protests are legitimate, but wreaking havoc is not. So let's talk about this here for just a second. Typically, people don't get to the point where they're wreaking havoc until they feel that they're not being heard, until they've already tried peaceful protest and they feel like there's nothing else for them to do. People in France are probably wondering, if we don't speak out about this, what else is Macron going to do to us, to our benefits, to our lives? Now, I told you that the garbage workers were one of the groups of employees that decided just to stop working. We're not going to pick up the trash. It is what it is. But also, employees that work in electric and gas have also made decisions to stop working. Listen to this. This is from Antonio Sabato Jr., random, I know, but it says breaking France electricians and gas workers saying, Emmanuel Macron, if you continue, there will be complete darkness at your place. Moments later, the Fort de Bragançon, Emmanuel Macron's official residence, was deprived of electricity by striking electricians. So they came directly for his electricity. They said, you know what? If you think we're playing around, we're going to cut off your electricity. Here's the video.
Si tu continues, il va faire tout noir chez toi. Emmanuel Macron, si tu continues, il va faire tout noir chez toi. Emmanuel Macron, si tu continues, il va faire tout noir chez toi.
So this is right outside of Macron's residence here. And so they're letting him know, yeah, we're cutting off your electricity and your gas. It just is what it is. That's right, Eric. It's similar to how you don't mess with the IT guy. 100%. I never understood why people at work want to piss off the IT guy. Why would you want to do that? You need the IT guys. You need them. Where he says snip, snip. 100%. So They're not playing around here. It's random that this came from Antonio Sabato Jr. I haven't heard of him since. It's been a long time. It has been a long time since I've heard from Antonio Sabato Jr. Now, there's more. There is more, because the way that people are talking about this, it's a doozy. And of course, CNN would be one of them. They're going to make it seem like what the French are asking for is unreasonable. I kid you not. Yes, Apollo, Antonio Sabato ain't been around since the 90s. Thank you. I couldn't remember. I was like, it's been a long time since he's been around. It has been a long time. Okay, so shout out to Case Study QB for this clip, because Case clipped this, and I'm glad he saw this because, again, I don't really like to watch mainstream media, to be honest with you. But Case was able to find it. Listen to this. Listen to the way they talk about the protesters.
Now, protests on the streets of Paris. Demonstrators are angry that the government raised its retirement age without even voting on it. Some French fury on display. Look, French retirees have probably the most generous benefits in the world, and workers are.
So she just said that the French probably have the most generous benefits in the world. Okay. So that means they're not allowed to protest. So that means that their president can just increase the retirement age. Like they're just supposed to overlook that because they have generous benefits. This is something they tend to do. They try to find ways to demonize the protesters instead of pointing their finger at President Macron about the decision that he made for everybody in the country without even allowing a vote on it.
Outrage that the retirement age is going to go up 2 years from just 62 years old to 64.
Notice how she frames it. It's going to go up from just 62 to just 64. And they're doing this on purpose because, like I said, they don't want Americans to get the wrong impression. There's already been talks of our politicians wanting to increase the retirement age. They don't want people to get any ideas. They don't want people here to start getting any ideas. Don't you guys start thinking about this. You have it good, even though we know that we don't. They want us to believe that we do.
And Sam Kiley joins us live from Paris. Sam, protesters blocked Paris's inner ring road earlier this morning. I see the garbage line, stacked up behind you. Hell hath no fury, like a French retiree scorns.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there are two things going on here. You've got, first of all, yet another attempt by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, to try to force through these pension reforms. The country says it's got a 12.5 billion euro, very similar sort of figure in dollars, deficit when it comes to the funding of pensions. These are pensions that those in work have to pay a supplement for those leaving work. So raising the age by 2 years is something that for the French really strikes for many of them, and 2/3 of the country are against these reforms, very much at the heart of their way of life. Now, yesterday we saw these spontaneous demonstrations across the country. There were several thousand here in Paris. More than 300 people have been arrested, though, in these demonstrations, and they were spontaneous, partly in response to the effects of these strikes, but also, or rather of the pension plans, but also because Emmanuel Macron's government forced this through without a majority in the National Assembly here.
See, notice again, they're not mentioning anything about the other piece of the protests, about them wanting to leave NATO, about them wanting to end this war with Russia and Ukraine. Notice how they're only talking about the pension piece. This is why it's important to listen to independent media. This is exactly why, because my friends, they seem to think that this is all this is about, is just about the pension. I just showed you at the beginning of the show, the protest against NATO. But CNN doesn't want to mention that. Again, that's on purpose.
Using a rather arcane part of the Constitution to drive through legislation that was not being ratified effectively by the Parliament here. Now that is something that is usually associated with actions in extremis. You're dealing with a national emergency, not when you're trying to come up with a series of fiscal reforms. And of course, so you can see this rubbish here building up on the streets of Paris. I've just come in from the Channel Tunnel, coming in by train from London. There are several streets here that were literally wall-to-wall garbage piled up. There's 7,000 tons at least of garbage that have reportedly been piled up here in the country. But it's not just the garbage collectors who've gone on strike. The unions are really very strongly opposed to this and planning a series of much less spontaneous and much less violent demonstrations over the next week.
Fascinating. All right, Sam Kiley, nice to see you. Thank you so much, Sam.
You see the way they talk about it? They want you to feel that what they're doing is, oh, this is violence. This is so bad. Oh my God, how dare they? How dare they complain about an increase in the retirement age? Now, that was CNN. Now, unfortunately, there have been decisions made because now President Macron has basically made it illegal to protest over the pensions. I kid you not. Listen to this. Now, do I think that the French are going to listen to him? No, I don't. I don't think so. I think they're totally fine with being arrested. I mean, what is he going to do? Is he going to make the garbage workers go back to work? Is he going to make the electricians go back to work? Is he going to force them to work? Listen to this.
French authorities have banned protests in Paris, which has seen demonstrations over the past few days.
So this was reported today. They have banned protests in Paris, but I'm still seeing video footage come out of people protesting. So, I mean, Paris is not the only city in France. There's other cities they can go to protest. I'm sorry, you ban it in Paris, but there's other cities. I don't think this is going to stop them. I really don't.
We're in response to the decision by President Macron's government to force through, without a vote, plans to raise France's retirement age from 62 to 64. Alex Rossi has more from Paris.
This is Place de la Concorde. Over here, you can see the lower house of Parliament. That is, of course, where the French government forced through this legislation using special constitutional powers. And that's one of the reasons that people across France are so very angry. And it's hard to overstate, really, just how furious people are about the raising of the retirement age. At the moment, it's 62. It's going to go up to 64. But part of the sort of French ideal, part of what really cuts to the core of being French, is the idea that you can have a very comfortable retirement and a state pension. Now, the problem the government says with all of that is that people across the country are getting older, the demographic is changing, and as a result of that, people are going to have to work longer to pay for it all. There are fewer workers, and their answer is to raise the retirement age. What you hear here on the streets, though, is people say that President Macron is really just a friend of the rich. What they would like to see to solve this problem, and people do acknowledge, even though they're opposed to it, that there is a problem, is they would like to see taxes being raised on the wealthy. Now, in terms of the unrest, we've seen over the last couple of days very big protests here on Place de la Concorde. You can see here there's police here, and there's police all around here. The head of the police has banned people from gathering here tonight because they don't want to see more violent confrontations. You can see over.
So you guys see that? The police have banned people from gathering in that area, not just protesting, but gathering.
Over here, the policemen are checking people's ID papers. There are plenty of people out here tonight, but many of them are tourists or families just enjoying their Saturday evening, but they've been banned from gathering here. We're hearing the sound of sirens around the city. There have been meetings and marches and demonstrations spontaneously happening around the capital. I think the big fear, though, for President Macron is that this kind of civil unrest we've seen, this industrial action, will spiral out of control. And it's worth bearing in mind that the raising of the retirement age is not simply an issue that this government has grappled with. It's been a rail of French politics dating back a few decades. I think the calculation in the Élysée Palace is that the hope is that they knew that this would be unpopular. They knew there would be a huge amount of turbulence as a result of that, and we're seeing that on the streets as garbage across the streets of the capital because, you know, refuse collectors are on strike. But he hopes, I think, that it will peter out sooner.
You know what's interesting? When I saw the garbage, let me show you something right here, right about there. When I saw the garbage piling up like this, I was just like, that just kind of reminds me of what I saw when I lived in New York City. Like, it just, like, for me, I was just like, I mean, when I lived in New York, like, we just threw out, well, at least they have barrels. Like in New York, we didn't have barrels. You just throw your trash bag out on the sidewalk. That doesn't help the rodent problem. But I'm just saying, like, I was like, that don't look too bad. That's actually kind of reminds me of what it looks like in New York.
Are on strike, but he hopes, I think, that it will peter out sooner rather than later. The danger, of course, for him and his government is that actually this gains massive momentum and it goes on for months or even longer and causes paralysis across the entire country.
See, that's what they're afraid of. It may go on for months across the entire country. When they protest over there, they do not play around. They don't protest for like a day. They'll protest for days, weeks, as long as need be, until they get what they want. Because they realized a long time ago that the workers as a mass actually have the power. When you come together, all the workers come together, there's more of them than President Macron, right? So they realized that a long time ago and they utilized that power. And someone explained this to me, and I want to show you this clip here. This is from Professor Richard Wolff. Now, he told me this a while back. It's been a while since Professor Wolff came on, but he told me this long time ago. And I'll just get it to the point here. Long time ago, because his family is originally from France. So he was telling me about this, and let me put it right about there. Okay, here we go. Listen to what he told me about what people do, not just in France, but just like in Europe in general. Listen to this.
So I've spoken French all my life, and I speak French now, and I follow events in France. For many decades, the French people take for granted certain things that the working class in France fought for and won. I'm going to mention them because I want an American audience to ask itself why we don't have that here. So I'm going to give you some examples. Under the law in France, a law pushed through many, many years ago, because this has been true what I'm about to tell you for a long time, pushed through by the socialists who have their own party in France, and that party has been the government many times over the last 30 years. The socialists pushed through a law which has never been repealed. Even when socialists lost elections and conservatives came in, they did not dare mess with this law because they would have had a revolution on their hands.
Did you hear that? It was the socialists who pushed those laws, who fought for it. And even when the political party would change, the administration would change, they still wouldn't mess with the laws that were pushed for by the socialists because, like Professor Wolff just said, they knew they would have a revolution on their hands. You see what's happening right now out in the streets in France. So they knew it would happen. President Macron said he knew that this would be unpopular, but he did it anyway. And he's seeing the fallout of that. Let's go on.
The law. Whenever you graduate from high school or college and you become a member of the labor force in France, it just means your schooling is over and now you're going to look for and take a job as an adult. Under the law in France, wherever you work, your employer must give you, from the day you start, 5 weeks of paid vacation every year.
5 weeks of paid vacation every year. I know people working here in the US that are lucky if they get 2 weeks paid vacation. I know people working here in the US that don't get any paid vacation, any paid sick time. Hello, the railroad workers, they didn't get paid sick time. They are guaranteed, regardless of who you work for. Let's say you worked at Dunkin' Donuts in France. Let's say you worked at McDonald's in France. You're still guaranteed that 5 weeks vacation every year. And this is one of the reasons why I think we have some of the health issues that we have in this country, is because there's a lot of stress. People are always working. People feel shamed to take vacation. People are shamed to take a day off if they're sick, to actually use their PTO time. There's this sense of embarrassment that can kind of come with that in this country. And it really does not make any sense. You're supposed to rest. You're supposed to recuperate. You're supposed to have that time where you're away from work and you can spend it with your family or whoever. You're supposed to have downtime. In this country, that is looked down upon. And we need to call it out for what it is. This is why people will work overtime and they feel like even if they're tired, they'll still do it because, oh, I might be pushed out of my job or I might be fired if I don't do it. These at will employment states that we have in this country. This is a big part of the problem. So if you have a lot of stress, yes, that can affect your health. Let's go on.
See that? Look at your own reaction. See that? Wonderful. And wonderful. That's the reaction I get. And that's not new. That's been around for that's been around your entire life. It's older than you are. Everybody who could should know about this. In the United States, you can work for 30 years for an employer and not get 5 weeks of paid vacation after 30 years. You get it in France after 30 minutes, it's yours. Let me give you another example. This one I'm going to take from Germany, country right next door to France. In Germany, you can go to any one of, they have excellent colleges and universities in Germany, is some of the best in the world. The tuition at a German university, you ready? 0. There is no tuition.
Now that one I knew.
There are no fees. All you have to do if you're a student at a German university, you have to pay for your room and board. You have to pay for your food that you eat and wherever you sleep, your apartment or whatever you have. That's your business. But you don't pay for education. Not only do the Germans do that for German people, but the Germans do it for anyone. There are currently 20,000 Americans getting their college degrees in Germany because they don't have to pay for it.
And this is something I highly recommend to those of you who are in high school. I know there's not a lot of people that watch me that are like 18, 19, but for those of you who are in high school or you have kids in high school, this is what I recommend to people. Like if you can go to school overseas in a country where tuition is free, I highly recommend that you do that. There's no sense in accumulating all this debt.
That means you don't have to go into debt to get your college degree, the way Americans have. The average debt in the United States of a college student right now, $40,000. That's the average. There are some who have 100 or 150, 200. And if you go on to law school or med school or anything else, it just goes into the stratosphere, how much.
Sometimes into the 400,000s. So a lot of times people say, well, doctors make all this money. A lot of doctors have a lot of student loan debt. Dentists, doctors, lawyers, those types of professions. Don't be surprised if they have $200,000, $300,000 of student loan debt. Med school is very expensive.
Borrow. But what a crazy thing. The Germans explain this. We want our people educated. If we have an educated labor force, it'll be more productive. It'll be able to contribute more to the society. We're investing in making our society better. Well, you want to explain to me why doesn't that apply in this country? Not only are we...
It doesn't. It doesn't apply in this country. And we need to ask ourselves, why is that? It's like they don't want more people in this country to be intelligent because they don't want us to realize we're getting used, we're being played. They don't want more people to be intelligent in this country because they don't want us to realize that we're being exploited by these employers. Sometimes I feel like that's what it is, that they don't really want a large middle class in this country. They want more people at the bottom to just be worker bees.
Not making it easier, but the prices of college have gone up faster than inflation, which is why everybody has to borrow to go to school these days, which means you graduate with a big debt load hanging over you. You know, I still teach, so I talk to my students. They're not getting married. They're not having children because they can't work it out. Neither the young men nor the young women, because they're being burdened. When I went to college, I didn't have to borrow money. My parents didn't have much money, but you know, I had a job in the summer and I managed it. I didn't have to borrow. If I went to school today, of course I'd have to borrow.
That's the big difference for people back then. Like Richard Wolff just told you, his parents didn't have a lot of money. But I have noticed talking to people that went to college during that time, they were able to work a part-time job and pay for their tuition. You can't do that today. You know, that's a big part of the problem. I want to get to the part here where he talks about, when I ask him what advice would he give to us. I'm going to get to that part because I thought that piece was really important. Yeah, I think this is the part. What advice would you give to like millennials and Gen Z generation, those of us who, you know, a lot of us, like you said, have chosen like we can't buy a house or they can't get married and all of those things. What advice? Okay, so either I shrunk and became shorter, or the previous chair that I had was taller. Sorry. Would you give them in reference to like, is that the way to continue to go about it? Should we try to save up for these things to happen? Or should we just continue what a lot of us have been doing, which is enjoying like experiences instead?
Well, that's a good question. That's a hard question. Let me tell you what I wish for. Then I'll try to answer your question. I am somewhat embarrassed, maybe even I should say ashamed, that my generation didn't do a better job of changing this society for your generation. I think we would have been happier had we done a better job as a group changing this world from the way we found it. And my hope is that you do. My hope, look, what's going to happen in this country, you're going to make that decision. People like you, people your age, people thinking like you are, you're going to make a change.
Okay, so I hope that message resonates with everyone. Like, we are the ones that are going to have to do it, because I hate to say so, but unfortunately, a lot of people that I've spoken to, I've talked to faculty members about this. I've spoken to family members about this who are a lot older, and they kind of feel like, you know, they had their fight. And I feel like it's going to be up to us. I really do. I just want you guys to see like what could be possible. That's all. What could be possible. Let me go to some of the super chats here. Steven says, people power on display in France. That's right. Thank you for the super chat, Ramona. The electricians union also have vowed to give Robin Hood services to schools and other needy people. Plus, the conservative governments have tried this numerous times. The retirement age is national, by the way. Thank you so much for that info, Ramona. And thank you for the super chat as well. Macron came out of the financial system. He is a neoliberal tool. That explains why Obama supported him. Thank you for the super chat, Steve. Yes, if you're in high school, learn German, go to university in Germany, my advice. And thanks for the super chat as well. German people are extremely intelligent. Not that I'm biased or anything. Yeah, it's just, I mean, just think about it. If public colleges or universities here in this country were free, you know, everybody would have that opportunity.